going on, everybody? Unexpected Points. Kevin Cole here. We are recording live on YouTube. For those of you who would want to check it out, check out the Unexpected Points YouTube channel. Allows you to get on there, see some of the visuals that I'll put up, some of the websites that I'm going to as part of this. Could be edifying for those who like to look at it. Personally, I think I mentioned this last week. I can't do it. I'm too ADHD and I need to be moving around while I'm listening to something. But for those of you who enjoy it or just, want to gaze upon this face, which I don't have my glasses on today, so I don't just throw anybody off, but becoming an old man here. And honestly, unless I have at least a few feet of room, that's I can't really see. The farsightedness, I guess it's called, the lack of nearsightedness is coming into play. That's when you know you're old. Like there's a lot of things that are starting to get somewhat old, and your boy here is approaching 50 fairly rapidly. I still got a few years to go here, but not that long away. I think that's like the descending into decay portion of your life here. Accelerating decay, you could call it, perhaps. I could say that until this point, quite honestly, I don't feel that different. I mean, my knees hurt a little bit after physical activities. I'm a little bit more stiff. But if you stay in shape, relatively in shape, I don't feel that different. But the eyes going, that's definitely the number one thing. And now I'm sure the physical stuff will start to fall apart in the next few years. And I guess that's why pickleball was invented. It reminds me of when Andre 3000 of Outkast fame was talking about his new album that was coming out. He does a bunch of jazz flute stuff on there, and everyone says, "Oh, they want you to, we want bars, we want raps." He says, "What am I going to rap about? Losing my eyesight, going bad, and getting a colonoscopy." And I was thinking to myself, "Wow, this is this is my life." So maybe I would be a good audience for him. Anyway. Let's go over the agenda for today. We have a couple of wide receiver contracts to talk about. So I'll talk about that. I'll also recommend, after you listen to this, listen to Jason Fitzgerald and whatever he'll say, which will be more edifying and knowledgeable than what I'm going to say. But I'll have my takes on it here. Maybe they'll mirror some of his takes. We often do mirror each other as far as takes on these different contracts. So we'll talk about Nico Collins. We'll talk about Jaylen Waddle. Over the cap, which Jason Fitzgerald runs, already has some numbers up there for each of these guys. They might flow around a bit, but I think this is really an interesting one of comparing the headline numbers versus the internals, the guarantees, things like that in these two different contracts and how to think about it. Also talk about that with the Dolphins, at least in particular, into a team building mindset for what they got going on there. I want to talk briefly about an interview of Brandon Beane by Robert Mays that was done over at the Athletic Football Podcast. These, you don't get a lot from these interviews, right? Head coaches, GMs typically don't want to be interviewed because what's the upside for them, right? The fans are either with them or against them. I don't think they're really going to generate a lot of positivity out of it. There was another interview with Mike McDonald, the new head coach of the Ravens, with Adam Schefter. And I listened to that, and honestly, it was just complete fluff. Like there was nothing of interest there at all. There's at least some stuff here with this Beane interview, although I don't know if I would be extremely confident as a Bills fan coming off of there. But I think they're going through a little bit of a rough patch here, but he also has one of the two best tailwinds. The Bills have one of the two best tailwinds in the NFL, and that's Josh Allen and his contract. The fact that he signed that 6-year deal in the past. The number one tailwind, of course, being the Patrick Mahomes 10-year contract that the Chiefs had. So we got that. We'll talk about briefly. We'll do paid subscriber Q&A from the site. That's unexpectedpoints.substack.com. So we'll go over some questions there. I put that out a little bit late today. Not quite. I think I did it mostly 24 hours in advance last time. This time it was the morning of for this podcast. So we don't have a lot of questions, but a couple of them did pop up. I'll discuss those. And then, of course, any Q&A that you want to drop here on YouTube. If you're watching live, you want to drop that in the comments. I'll address those by the end. I always think that I'm not going to go that long, but then I end up spending like 40 minutes on the first topic. So we'll see if that happens or not this time around. All right, let's get to the wide receiver contract. So the first one was announced earlier this week. It was Nico Collins contract. Let me pull it up on Over the Cap. Again, we only support Jason Fitzgerald and no one else, not any other fraudulent cap contract websites. So Nico Collins here. Okay, I can blow it up a little bit. All right. So the headline is 24.25 million per year, 3-year extension. A couple of different ways to think about this contract for him. So let's remember, Collins was a 3rd-round draft pick. So, not a 5th-round draft pick, but quite honestly, the way these contracts scale down, the way, again, I'm using that word decay again, except for not in reference to my own physical state, but in reference to how much the contract amounts are in the NFL draft, very high near the top, especially in the top 5 and then to the top 10 and so on. And it decays very quickly. And once you're into the 3rd round, there's not really a huge difference between 3rd round and, going into the 4th, 5th round, something like that. So he had 1 year remaining on his deal. He's 3 years into his NFL career. That 1 year helps a lot when it comes to how you look at the new contract going forward. In some ways, I think it can be a detriment to negotiations because you're playing with house money in a way. If you're the Texans and you look at this and you say, okay, we're going to do a 3-year extension, but we're going to get a 4th year. The 4th year of that rookie contract is going to be rolled into it. And that 4th year of that rookie contract is only going to be, I think it was scheduled to be 1.5, 2 million, something like that. It might have been more than 2 million because you get a higher amount sometimes based upon achieving certain goals as a rookie. You get a higher amount than what you would have been scheduled. So let's say at worst it was going to be a couple of million. Well, let's look at the total amount here. This will figure it out here. So the cap number for the total amount is 76 million. And the contract extension was 72.75. Oh, there's per game rosters who are not part of that. So we'll lower that down. So that's 73.5. So yeah, it was basically $1 million and change that was going to be left on his deal. So you have that $1 million and change for 1 year, and then you have the 72.75 million for 3 years. So you combine that all together, and then it becomes 4 years and $74 million essentially. And then he has some per roster game bonuses that are being added into here, which is getting it a little bit higher, but those are not guaranteed. So the way you're able to structure it is, although you say it's an extension of 24.25 million a year, the cap numbers don't exceed that until the last 2 years of the contract, and they're significantly below that in the first 2 years. It's 6.6 million in 2024, 18.4 million in 2025. Then it goes up to barely above that annual extension amount that gets publicized out there. It goes up to 24.9 and then 26, a little bit over 26. And those contracts amounts, we also have to look at those and say the guarantees are not fully gone, but at least some of them is gone there. There are a couple of little things here. Number one, 10 million of the 2026 salary becomes guaranteed in 2025. So that makes it difficult to figure out how you're going, if you're going to cut that off season, there's not going to be much cap savings there. And then the next year, 10 million of the 2026 becomes guaranteed within that year. So you don't really have to worry about that. But if it was it's not purely a 2-year deal and then team options, because before the second year starts, 10 million becomes guaranteed. So, it's a 2-year deal. You're going to owe 10 million of the base salary, and then you're going to have to write off about 8.5 million. So it would be about 18.5 million that is going to have to be written off if you decided to cut him after 2 years. Now, you could trade him to someone else. But they would have to pick up a $20 million base salary and a $21 million base salary going forward, and the $10 million of guarantees in 2026. So it's not quite a glorified 2-year deal, but there's a lot less when it comes to the guarantees and the rolling guarantees going forward. And that's the big differentiator between the Collins contract and the Waddle contract, which I'll get to. But speaking first about Collins, the reason I say it can be a little bit of a curse, the playing with house money, is you're willing to give more on the extension, knowing you only have that $1 million for a season you can add into it. Is Nico Collins worth $24 million a year in light of where we've seen other contracts so far this offseason? I mean, I'm not sure. It's at least a little bit questionable, in my opinion. But the Texans are, they have the rookie contract window. They have Diggs, who they presume will be off of the books after this season, which before Collins starts to have a little bit of higher contract amounts that dig into it. So those are some of the things that go into it. They probably have a little bit too much flexibility, though, just to say, after one great season where he's competing with a rookie for targets and not a whole lot else, in a season where, at least efficiency-wise, Stroud was really, really, really good. And we don't know if even CJ Stroud is gonna necessarily be that contract anymore. I mean, that person anymore. There's a high probability, I think, that Nico Collins will step back production-wise this year. Because let's remember, this is really a 1-year jump from a third-round player. So if we go into Nico Collins and his numbers so far in his career, yeah, fantastic numbers this last season. 1,297 yards, so almost 1,300 yards, 8 touchdowns, 109 targets, 80 receptions, really strong efficiency. I mean, 11.9 yards per target is pretty insane. But he's a player who averaged only a little bit over 7 yards per target his first 2 seasons and never cleared 500 yards in either of those 2 seasons. Never cleared more than 2 touchdowns in either one of those 2 seasons. He did miss some time, but still, he mostly played there. I mean, even this last year, I think for routes run, he wasn't that high versus some other players this year. And if we look at the Texans as a team this year and how he contributed to their success this year, and I think this is what's going into it a lot, the money that he's being paid here. If you just go to yards per target for the team, I mean, he's number 1, and there's no one else even close. The 11.9 yards per target, which is a very finicky number. I know a lot of people don't like to look at yards per target because, like, targets themselves are a stat that's a good thing. So if you have a lot of targets, even if you're not getting the yards, that proves something. But I think it's a good comparison tool when we're looking at players who have, 100 targets. I'm not comparing a player with, 50 targets to a player with 100 targets. We're talking about a 100-target player here, averaging 11.9 yards per target. If you go down even further, there's really not a whole lot close. There's 10.3 yards per target for Noah Brown, but only on 55 targets. There's 9.5 yards per target on Tank Dell on 75 targets. So he really was a big driver of their efficiency. 88 targets this year for Dalton Schultz. Not surprising as a tight end. His yards per target is only 7.2. So I could see why they looked at Collins and they said, this is a guy we want to pair with CJ Stroud. I just wonder a little bit whether that number had to be made, because if we're going to compare him to some other contracts that we're seeing near the top, if we bring up the top wide receiver contracts, some of the younger guys in particular that we're seeing in that mold, let's go ahead and share this one. So we have Amon-Ra St. Brown was signed for $30 million a year. So, it's $5 million and change less than this sort of amount. We have, look at the young guys. Devontae Smith, $25 million a year. That's interesting. I mean, a lot more guarantees. And again, that's the lever there. But without the guarantees, Nico Collins is pretty close to that Devontae Smith contract. Devontae Smith, the number 10 overall pick. I don't know, like, going forward, I think Devontae Smith would be worth a lot more, like on a trade market or something like that, if they wanted to deal him out there. I mean, Nico Collins is a young guy. He's doing well. I think they overpaid slightly on this, but again, they have a lot of wiggle room there. They're dealing with a lot of better circumstances when it comes to his contract rolling it into it. Although it is a little bit interesting when we see the 3 years deals for Devontae Smith and we see the 3-year deal, which I'm going to discuss for Jaylen Waddle, those are being laid on top of their 4th year in their rookie contract and the exercised 5th year option. So they're really becoming 5-year contracts. This Collins deal is only becoming 4-year contracts. So he will roll out a little bit earlier. And if you have a guy like Stroud who ends up being the guy, maybe you would have liked to have locked up Collins for a little bit longer than that. I'm not sure if that was him or the team that decided that, but he's going to be, 28, 29 coming off of this deal. Maybe he can get another contract if he continues to be successful with that one. All right, let's go to Jaylen Waddle. And you might look at this and say, okay, the contract at 28.25 per year, so not quite as good as Amon-Ra St. Brown, which is interesting. Like, remember, Amon-Ra St. Brown, 4th round pick versus Jaylen Waddle, who's a top 10 guy. Top 10 guy who has also put up 1,000-yard seasons each one of the years. Maybe the question with him, if you wanted to nitpick here, would be, okay, is he a 1A or is he a 1B type of receiver playing alongside Tyreek Hill? At the same point in time, Tyreek Hill sucks up a lot of attention. And so, yeah, if you look at Waddle's stats in his career, I mean, even as a rookie, he's getting 140 targets and over 1,000 yards. He's getting 117 targets and nearly 1,400 yards in his second year. Remember, these are years where Nico Collins was getting less than 500 yards. And then in a shortened year, he missed 3 games this last year, a little bit over 1,000 yards and 14 yards per reception. So I think the Dolphins are getting him off of a little bit of a lull. I mean, he still averaged 9.8 yards per target, so it's not like he was inefficient, but not anything close to the 11.6 yards per target that we saw last year, and probably the efficiency that people were hoping for going forward. But looking at the deal, the big difference here, like if you looked at it purely from an APY standpoint, I think you could say you got a really good discount paying him basically $4 million more per year for Waddle versus Collins. And I know some people are gonna like Collins. Yeah, again, top 10 pick versus a 3rd round pick, guy who's put up a lot more production for 3 straight years versus 1 year. I think it's fairly obvious to me, like where I would want to place my bets, but that's one way that goes into it. But the lever here that the Dolphins are using to perhaps keep that number reasonable enough are the guarantees, because the fully guaranteed money is $36 million. So you think, oh, well, they're going to give him a $23 million signing bonus on this. He would have had guarantees anyway in the deal because of his last year of his rookie contract would be guaranteed, and the 5th year option would have been guaranteed anyway. So you're not really getting much in the ways of guarantees here. Yet they have a bunch of rolling guarantees in this contract. So his salaries through 2025, so this year and next year, are fully guaranteed already. In March of 2025, the 2026 becomes guaranteed. So if you want to cut him, you got to cut him after 1 season to avoid having a guarantee on the salary 2 seasons further in the future. So it's quite a ways. In 2026, 15.2 million of salary becomes guaranteed for 2027. It's not all the salary, but it's well more than half of the salary. So probably keeping him on the roster through 2027 is what you're looking at this one. And then in 2027, 81.9 million of salary is guaranteed. So that almost guarantees most of everything. And I don't, that note is a little bit weird. So maybe I shouldn't lean too much into it, but this is really looking like a deal where they have him locked up and needing to pay him basically through his 20s. So they're dedicating a lot more. Yeah, the Texans will be on the hook for the 10 million if they want to cut him after 2 years, the additional 10 million in salary, or they could, try and give him away for a ham sandwich and take some of the cap charge and do something like that. Not really those options available to the Dolphins with this deal. So this is really interesting for me to think about, like, what are the Dolphins doing overall with not only this contract, but with their total spending. Because if we go to the Dolphins and their total spending amount, I think this is a good deal for Waddle because of all those guarantees. Again, you're getting guarantees in quite a ways here. If we look at their active roster spending overall, for this year, it's big, but let's look at even for 2025. Let's look at next year. Tyreek Hill has a cap number of $34 million. And it wouldn't be the craziest thing if you saw signs of decline for him, this season, right? I mean, Tyreek Hill is, let me see. Let's get this here. Tyreek Hill, age. How old is Tyreek Hill? So he's 30 years old right now. So he'll be into his age 31 season next year, and he'll have a $35 million cap charge. They'll probably restructure it, figure something else out if they want to do something there. There's no guaranteed salary there. There's some signing bonus that you'll have to take. You can save some dead money, but I don't know. Maybe they're thinking this could be the last year for Tyreek Hill, and they'll cut him there. Then you got Bradley Chubb at a pretty enormous number there. Let's remember they traded away a lot of draft capital to get him. Teron Armstead, a big free agency signing, also with a big number there. Jaylen Waddle, this is not right if you're looking at this because this is his old fifth-year option. What would have been his fifth-year option for $15.5 million. Jalen Ramsey, $26 million. And then you got some other guys who float through here. So, I mean, it's a big look at they're already, their team space, they're already 11 million over the cap. Obviously, they have a lot of wiggle room here without guarantees on these deals, but I don't know. This is a little bit make or break-ish on the current core of the Dolphins. I think what they've done is they've committed to Jaylen Waddle here as being a big piece. And well, let's look at Chubb, because Chubb would be the other younger guy that they would commit to. So his deal, yeah, they haven't really committed there. It looks like there's some decent amount left there, but they'll probably commit to him somewhat, right? I don't know. He is 28 though this year, so he'll be 29 next year. I don't know. Actually, so forget Chubb even for a second here. I don't think there's really anyone on this roster other than Waddle now, and that's why they're willing to make this deal where they say Waddle is our piece going forward, like Ramsey, Hill, Chubb. We'll see. The rumor mill was that I'm just looking around to see if there's anyone else I'm missing here. Not really. I don't think. Jalen Phillips has been fine as a rookie, but I don't think it's guaranteed that he's going to be signed and stuck around. I mean, Devon, Achan, whatever. And who you don't see on these cap liabilities. Again, lots of flexibility here, so I don't want to harp on it too much. But again, they look like they're way over the cap already for 2025, without having to cut some of these guys. That's cutting and then maybe bringing in players at a lower amount. Who you don't see on this list is Tua Tagovailoa, right? This is it. We're going into the 5th year option of his contract. All these guys getting re-signed after 3 seasons. When it comes to quarterback, we're not seeing that with Tua. He's up to $23.7 million this year, and that's it. So what are they going to do? Supposedly he's been offered like 50-something million a year. I don't know. I might take that if I was Tua. This is not Kirk Cousins territory, but we're getting into that sort of territory of I'm a pretty firm believer that any team that wants to re-sign their quarterback will re-sign their quarterback and will probably even kind of do it early unless they have some reservations about it. Like Dak Prescott, there were a lot of reservations about Dak Prescott when he made it that far. There were a lot of reservations when it came to, at the time, the Redskins thinking about Kirk Cousins, and that's why he eventually, played out some couple of tags and went forward. Maybe Tua will have to play on some tags. We'll see. There is some chance that a season from now, you have maybe Tua on the tag. I think he'll get tagged at least. But if he doesn't play well, I don't know if they're going to come to an agreement for where his contract is. So there's some chance you'll have Tua on the tag, Tyreek Hill maybe on the team, maybe not on the team. Jaylen Waddle still there for the next several years. So yeah, in a year or two, this team could look a whole lot different. If I were Miami, at least next year, you got to start thinking, okay, what are we doing as far as quarterback is concerned with the NFL draft? I think even what you might be thinking about there. Not necessarily that you have to, right? Depending upon how Tua plays, but it could get interesting if you're going to get stuck up on that 50-something $million number, because Hill's going to be, he's not going to last forever. And his current contract is so ginormous. You're going to have to either ask him to take significant restructuring cuts, which would probably have to happen in the context of him being in decline, which is difficult to think about, a player in his 30s in decline. Or you're going to have to kick that can even further down the road and potentially jeopardize years where you're going to have Tua and Jaylen Waddle's contracts start to go up. So we'll see how long they continue running that back. I think they kind of have to almost win the division and really push forward this year, with the Bills having their own struggles with the cap to figure out what they're going to end up doing going forward. Okay, that's the contract talk for the for the Dolphins. But the Dolphins are one of the more interesting teams going forward, figuring out what they're going to be doing with Tua and with their contracts, because even when it comes to Tua, actually I'll talk about this a little bit later. I'll talk about it when it comes to there's a question on Jordan Love, so I'll get into him because Tua's situation feeds into the Jordan Love situation and so on. The next thing I want to talk about from the week, and again, these interviews are not great. No offense to Robert Mays, but you're not getting a ton out of these GMs. But he did talk to Brandon Beane, and I want to put Beane's feet to the fire a little bit on some of his answers to the questions that he had on this, that I'm not buying fully, and just highlighting kind of how favorable of a situation that Beane has with Josh Allen. So Beane was being asked, and I think Mays did a good job here, is focusing on the cap stuff. This is what you got to focus on when we're talking about the Bills. What's going on with the cap? How did you make their decisions? Did you want to do a full teardown? And again, like, full teardown contextually doesn't really work with Josh Allen on your team. But, how much of a teardown did you want to do? The one thing that I don't think there was enough of, and I'll talk a little bit more about this, is a reflection on, like, hey, did we make some mistakes being more all-in-ish in the past? Because Beane frames it as not wanting to ever go super all in. I think they kind of did that before, honestly. But anyway, so this is Mays talking about the cap with Beane. He meanders around a little bit, so I may stop and start it as we're talking about it to interject here. But this is, again, Mays talking to him about the cap situation and how he thinks about, tear down versus retooling and all that sort of stuff.
When this offseason started and you guys moved on from Jordan, Mitch, Trey White, I was wondering if you were going to try to take all of your cap medicine this year and really clear the decks for 2025 and beyond. And that's not exactly what happened. You moved some money around, you gave Dawson Knox a new deal. So I'm just curious, can you just walk me through your approach to the cap for this year and 2025 and how you were trying to balance those things?
Yeah, I mean, I've told people here all the time, I don't ever want to go into a year and say, hey, we're just going to strip it down. We're going to hit the reset button. That's not the goal. Things happen along the way, and you can never 100% say that you wouldn't walk into that situation. But we want to compete for it. This team is built to go out and compete. We've won the division 4 years in a row. We want to fight and win that thing again, because that's the easiest path to the playoffs, and you're guaranteed at least one home game. Gives you your best chance, to get to the big game, which we're still trying to get to. So we want to compete this year. We want to be in it. Our goals have not changed. It's just there's some different players at different positions. We did make a lot of draft picks this year. We drafted 10 guys, and we're going to need some of those guys to play right away. Whether they start, whether they're a key backup, or help us on special teams. There's some guys that we believe we found each day of the draft that can, get a jersey, be one of our 48, dressed on Sundays, barring them, staying healthy and doing what we think they'll do. But also adding some draft picks for next year. We know we talked about the cap earlier. what's the most cost control is drafted players. And so we're going into next year right now with a 1, 2 2s, a 3, 2 4s, a couple of 6s, and hopefully 1 to 2 comp picks mid round. Depending on how that all shakes out with play time. With the guys we lost versus the guys we signed. So we want to also be ready for next year to continue to get some more youth in here, and the college draft is super important for us to maintain relevance and to continue to compete for AFC East titles and again everything that we want to get to.
Okay, so let's talk through this a little bit here with what Beane said there. I was actually ended up letting him play out the answer to that question rather than cutting it off midway, as I realized I there's some of these points I don't want to like double and triple and quadruple count what I'm saying here. Yeah, I mean, they are still competing this year, clearly. I mean, if you look at the betting odds for the AFC East, at least as they are on DraftKings right now, they are the favorites, although there's not much difference between them, the Jets, and the Dolphins, which wouldn't have been the case. Well, actually, they would have been pretty close, I guess, with Aaron Rodgers and the Jets last year. So it would have been kind of the case to win the AFC right now. They are tied for third with the Bengals at plus 700. And to give you an idea of like conference versus conference, that's the same as the Eagles and the Cowboys. So, okay, although I had them as being, maybe the second best team in the NFL last year. And then their chances of going all the way and winning the title having to come through the AFC, they are fifth now, slightly ahead of the Bengals. So they actually have the same odds for the Bengals to make it to the championship, but slightly better odds to win the championship, which at least implied in that is that they see him as being better than the Bengals this year. A lot of it is Josh Allen, I have to say, because when I started to dig into what the Bills are doing here, it's tough to say that they haven't torn it down almost as much as you could think was possible. Mays mentions in this podcast that he thought they might tear it down even more than they actually did. I never thought that. I thought they might actually try to do a run it back. So I'm surprised they tore it down. I definitely did not expect the Stephon Diggs trade. Tre'Davious White, I wasn't sure what the situation is going to be as far as cutting him. But if you look at their roster right now, and they talk about building around the quarterback, and it starts with the quarterback, building around the quarterback. I mean, they have Allen now on a $30 million cap hit after having restructured him in the past to have low numbers in the past. And this $30 million number, it's significant, but what is it? 20, 25, 30, 35, 40 million under what Josh Allen may actually be worth. I mean, we are in an NFL environment, in my opinion, which is the number one quarterback is Patrick Mahomes. The number two quarterback, there's a big gap. Number two quarterback is Josh Allen. And then there's another big gap before we get to everyone else. So you have that guy in an environment where Jared Goff is getting an extension for 50 plus million a year. You have that guy and you're paying him $30 million. That's like such a huge advantage for them and the flexibility they're going to have with that contract going forward. But other than that, I mean, we got Von Miller, who I don't know. What are you going to get out of Von Miller this year? Your guess is as good as mine for what's going to end up happening there. You got Matt Milano, where they signed him. Again, these are the easy things. The easy thing was re-signing him. He was a great coverage linebacker. Now he's been injured, and we'll see what's going on there. Deion Dawkins is next. So the first offensive player we have here, $11.5 million cap number, and he's also been restructured. He's something where they would lose $30 million on the cap. It would be a $41 million cap hit if he was cut because they just restructured him. But then other than that, you start counting down the rest of the guys. You go Ed Oliver, Teron Johnson, Dawson Knox is next in cap number for an offensive player. So after Josh Allen and the left tackle, Deion Dawkins, who they restructured. Now you got Dawson Knox, a guy who, they probably should have cut in some sort of way. It was a weird thing that they gave him a pretty big contract, which was tying them to them. They restructured him when they had Dalton Kincaid they drafted trading up to in the first round for him. So that was weird. You go down further and further. We got a kicker who's on here. And then you have Connor McGovern, who's going to be playing center, I believe, for them replacing Mitch Morse, who was a contract casualty. So not a lot of money that they're spending on any of these guys. If you go to overall spending, positional spending here, if you go to total offensive spending, you dig down, dig down, dig down, dig down. We have the Bills at 6th to last. And that's with $33 million, $33.4 million being dedicated to quarterback spending. So if you strip out quarterback spending, because all the teams below them have low quarterback spending, other than the Chargers, which is still relatively low at $22 million. All the teams below them in total offensive spending are not trying to win this year, other than maybe the Chargers. The Chargers have a lot of issues, right? Look at the Titans, the Steelers, and the Packers. Well, the Packers may be trying to win, but they got a really cheap Jordan Love contract, so that helps them. They get all these rookie wide receivers, so that helps them. But still, for the Bills, they're paying $5.3 million at running back, not a lot, although they invested in draft capital and Cook. Only $16 million at wide receiver. So again, we're trying to build around Josh Allen. It's all about the quarterback. This is what he says in this interview. Their cap spending is 3rd to last at wide receiver this year. They're building things together with, sticks and glue right here. Tight end spending is actually kind of high, but again, you'd like Dawson Knox is part of that, or it's in the middle of the league, but Dawson Knox is part of that, and I'm not sure if they even really like him that much. And then their offensive line spending is 7th to last. This is not a great team that's being built around Allen. And part of the problem is, even if you do their defensive spending, it's been basically middle of the league. How can they be bottom of the league offensive spending and middle of the league in defensive spending? Like, that doesn't make any sense. Where's all the money going? Well, the money's going to about $50 million in dead cap this year. Yeah, you could say this is not as bad as post Thomas Dimitroff Falcons. It's maybe not as bad as some of the years that we saw with Drew Brees in New Orleans, but this is really Josh Allen saving everything. All these different odds that we're seeing. It would be really a difficult and potentially disastrous season if they didn't have such surplus value on Josh Allen, who is on his second contract that's been restructured, that the cap hits are going up. They still have all that value on that contract, which is really saving him this year. All right, let's go to the rest of this conversation with Brandon Beane.
Zeroed out Josh a couple times and restructured that to get some space. You've done it with other players, and it seems like you might be able to do that again next year, whether it's Josh, Ed Oliver, Deion Dawkins, I think, is somebody that would make sense potentially. What are the limits of that? As you're pushing money into future years, and
remind you, they just restructured Deion Dawkins, so it's like Deion Dawkins again. You're going to restructure. Like, you can only push. I mean, the offensive line at least is someplace to think about after quarterback because the guys last so long. But anyway, whatever. I'm gonna start being interrupting now. I can't help myself.
as more teams around the league seem to be embracing that, what are the upper limits of how often and how aggressive you can be in using that as a strategy?
I actually like this question. I want to ask this to a lot of different teams because I don't know. I feel like the Eagles, some others, like, yeah, you're getting pretty aggressive here about some of these void years and other things. So let's see what he has to say. I'll just tell you up front. Spoiler alert: he doesn't give a great detailed answer here. It's kind of like, you do what you can do, and you restructure where you can, and you don't restructure where you can't. I mean, this guy's just trying to figure things out as it's going along.
Yeah, I don't think you want to go all in. I think you can. You've seen teams do it.
Again, like the Bills went all in with the extensions on Diggs. Maybe not as all in as the Rams, but you went pretty all in with the Von Miller deal in particular, and now they're paying the price for that.
I don't think you just want to max the credit card. That's really what it does. What it does is if you take every guy, like you name those guys, and there's probably some other ones with maybe that we could create, but maybe it's less. If you max your card at some point, that payment's coming due, and it's not going to be pretty. And
one other thing I'll say about that, the maxing your card and the payment will come due. When we're talking about non-quarterbacks, that payment's going to come due potentially in 2 years, potentially in 4 or 5 years, because maybe that player continues to play well. I mean, one of the things that saved the Saints after some cap problems was the fact that they had a bunch of players who played well into their 30s, which allowed them to do all these restructures and, cross their fingers that these guys don't decline, and it worked. But the risk in that when you have a Josh Allen who's going to be in his prime for the next 10 years is much, much higher. Okay, let me continue.
Just what I said earlier, try not to walk into a year or be on a 2-year rut, heaven forbid, where we just got to eat medicine and totally, we can't afford anything. It's, I don't want.
I'm on team never eat medicine. Take your medicine, I think is probably the appropriate analogy there. Never eat it. The Patriots did a really great job with Tom Brady. I know the contracts were smaller back then and blah, blah, blah. Of just being proactive about these things. I don't know. Too many teams when you have a Josh Allen and like the Bills when you have a Josh Allen are playing this game of like, you don't need to push everything all in and hope to luck into a championship with Josh Allen.
Want it to be Josh Allen and then just all guys on rookie deals or 1-year minimum type deals. We want to be able to have flexibility to fill in and add, a year ago we added a Leonard Floyd this time of year that was still out there. We want to be able to do things like that. Will we be able to do that every year? Like, is our cap that way this year? No, but maybe next year it is, depending on who we re-sign between now and then, who we add in free agency, where the cap truly goes to, all those things. But we want flexibility. Don't want to, like I said earlier, I don't want to walk into every single year and go, man, how are we just going to get ready to get into the league year, much less be able to spend on, on a free agent or two.
Okay, well, that's it that I got from the interview. So I don't know. To me, maybe I'm wrong. You guys let me know if I sound wrong. To me, it sounds like he's kind of like, I'm just trying to figure things out. I restructure. Like they asked him about the Stephon Diggs and the timing there. He doesn't really go into any of the stuff with Diggs, maybe because it's like personal sort of stuff that he doesn't want to get into. But he's kind of like, well, we decided to take our medicine here. We did a June 1 on Tre'Davious White because we didn't want to think about it there. You got to think about today. You got to think about tomorrow. You got to think about 2 years from now. You got to think about 3 years from now. I don't know. It just, the randomness and kind of the all overness of what he's talking about wouldn't really give me a lot of confidence unless he would be a little bit more open about the fact of, listen, we tried to win a championship. We saw this team. We lost with 13 fucking seconds left to go. We should have beat the Kansas City Chiefs there. We were on tilt after that. We should have been, going on and then beating the Bengals and going to the Super Bowl and winning the Super Bowl that year. Didn't happen. We said, fuck it. We're going to go get Von Miller. We're going to re-sign everyone. We're going to restructure Josh Allen. We're going to push everything in for this window. And it didn't work. And it was a mistake. Probably. I mean, even if it had worked, maybe you could say it wasn't a mistake. But again, we're going into the rest of Josh Allen's prime here with a lot of medicine. Again, he's eating a lot of medicine right now. And I don't think it was quite as forthright about that. But then again, what do you expect from these guys? They're not going to be super forthright about anything necessarily, because what's the advantage in doing so? All right, let's go to the questions from the website. We got a couple questions here, which I appreciate, despite the fact that, again, I didn't give you guys a ton of notice here. I'll bring it up. Okay. So we'll start with Sam. Sam the man. Always feeding me, giving some content here. Let's make this a bit bigger so people can see. Okay. With all the changes in the sports media landscape, do you have any insights based on your own experience? Most recently, NFL Network seems to be pursuing a partnership or merger with ESPN, and a lot of their personnel is slowly being let go. Well, let me tell you, no one has approached me about a job at NFL Network or ESPN. I don't make for good TV. Unfortunately, the measured takes do not necessarily make for great TV. Yeah, I think we've seen this kind of generally over time. Okay, so the larger picture is there was I'm kind of being a little repetitive here, but there's some largesse at a lot of these institutions. ESPN had a pretty sweet deal for a very long time where they had the TV rights, and the leagues were a little bit behind the curve as far as charging what they should have been charging for these TV rights. The viewership went up. ESPN had a bunch of money. They didn't have a lot of competition. Again, there's, supply and demand issue here, right? Not nearly as much demand from different sources, raising the value of these TV deals. They had a bunch of stuff left over. They had guys like John Skipper that was over there, who was doing a lot of hiring a bunch of people to explore different avenues of sports and maybe appeal to different audiences that weren't there before, and do some more 30 for 30 and do some more projects that are not revenue generating, that are not sufficient on their own, but were part of a branding, of a reputational branding that you're bringing into ESPN that you would hope would work going forward. I mean, but the reality was the reputational branding is not getting people to tune in. People are not tuning into Sports Center anymore like they used to versus watching highlights on YouTube. The reputational branding doesn't matter. It's all about dollars and cents when it comes to these TV contracts, which are going up massively. So because of that, ESPN eventually has to let go, especially of a lot of their highest paid talent, which is not directly tied to the money-making thing, which is broadcasting games. That's the thing that still cannot really be replaced on the same level as far as the internet is concerned, are purely an internet formatted way of doing it, is broadcasting live sports. Now, internet providers have gotten into it. We've seen Amazon, we've seen Netflix now, Peacock, which is attached to NBC, Paramount Plus, which is attached to CBS. But there's given a bunch of different avenues for bidding on these games. And then there's also ESPN Plus, which is another aspect of it where, again, you're purely getting into buying the TV rights, charging for that, and really figuring out the margins on there, which are going to be thinner and allow less for other places. That's what's happening. I think for NFL Network, I think what they've seen is they went through this idea of, we want to own the content and maybe push in the direction of soup to nuts. They were thinking before in the past of, maybe we can like elbow out the ESPNs of the world. Why are we selling our rights to ESPN and they're making big margins on it and funding these lavish expenses and big personnel? Why don't we have our own shows? Why don't we broadcast our own games? And that's, remember, NFL Network started broadcasting some games there. We have our own talent there. Well, I think what they've realized, and it's similar to what ESPN has realized, is, man, we got all of these bidders out there who are bidding for the content. Like, why do we have to build up our own network? This whole idea that we were going to control everything and have to deal with all that stuff. Why do that? I mean, we've seen how much of a disaster some of the things were when you're getting the all 22 and the NFL broadcasts back on the NFL website. It was a horrible experience there. Why not let Amazon Prime deal with this? Why not let Netflix now deal with this? And let them deal with all of the broadcasting stuff. We'll have our own games that we'll still think about broadcasting, but we're going to dial back and just let that demand. Don't be another cog in this demand bidding against these other teams, these other networks. Let them bid against each other and let's get the hell out of there. So I think that's kind of the dynamic of what's going on in sports. And I would see it continue to go in that direction. What I would really want to see, and I don't know if we're going to see this at all, is that when an Amazon Prime comes out with a broadcast like they did last year, maybe don't completely replicate what a normal traditional broadcast is. I'll be interested to see what sort of experimentation they could do there. I know my man, Sam Schwartzstein, and others have been, looking at adding value in as far as looking at their analytical broadcast there. Maybe some others can do something like that. So that's what I'm interested in seeing. That's my take on it. But again, I'm not a sports media landscape expert. Alex with a question here. What incentive do the Packers have to get a deal done with Love prior to the season? The consensus seems to be that Love would get 50 plus $1 million average annual value contract if done sometime this spring, summer. Given the number is already this high, wouldn't it make more sense for the Packers to wait until during/after the season in case Love struggles? Is the team worried about a potential holdout from Love? Maybe I'll go last thing first. I don't just this is highly speculative, of course, but I don't think they're worried about a potential holdout because Love was willing to sign that contract last year. And in a way, I'd be a little bit surprised, especially because he did have there were some ups and downs. I mean, midway through the season, people were like, I don't know about Jordan Love. I don't know about this Packers team. He seems to have a mentality of, I'm not going to say a little bit of self-doubt, but a little bit of like not being overly puffed out chest and wanting to bet on himself. He surely did not do that last year. So would he be willing to do that this year and make a stink? I don't know. Maybe we'll see. I mean, the Packers are a pretty solid organization over the years as far as transitioning for long-term, usage of Favre over to Rodgers. So maybe Love sees, hey, I'm the guy. I'll move forward there. 50 million a year plus. I think I would wait, or I would be a little bit hesitant for the Packers to do that for some of the reasons that I mentioned before. We do have 1 year of history on Love, and it is what would be the equivalent of his 4th year in the NFL, right? Last season, I think it was 2020 draft. Yeah. So like that's something. It's better than a rookie season as far as his predictiveness going forward, but we don't know everything. And I think when it comes to quarterback contracts, the deals that you're going to look at going forward, let's bring up some quarterback contracts here, and I can get an idea. So we got Burrow's got the biggest deal. Okay, so Goff resigned. I mean, in an environment where Goff is getting $53 million a year, I don't know what the hurry would be necessarily to get something. So you got Jackson, Hurts, these guys are all locked up. So who do we have left, right? We got Dak Prescott, 31-year-old Dak Prescott. What number is he going to get? I don't know, probably 50-something million. But I don't think it's going to be so high that you would be that worried about the precedent being set there, or a new record being set. And then after that, you don't got a lot. I mean, you got Trevor Lawrence, who has, like, if he had a ball out sort of year this year, maybe he could really smash things. There might just be a little disconnect with Lawrence as far as the hope that everyone has for him and the results that we've seen so far, which don't come together in the contract amount, which might seem appropriate because he would be the one guy that I would point to as being able to knock a new ceiling on the market if he really had an outstanding year because of how good of a prospect he was seeing before. I know some people are down on him, but he would be the other guy there. But it's really just those two guys now. We've kind of gotten through a glut of contracts. Again, Tua's another guy here. I mean, what's Tua going to be? I don't know. I don't think he's going to smash the market necessarily either. I guess I would just want to have that 1 more year. And I know people hate it because if you get that 1 more year and he plays really, really well, and then you sign a huge deal, everyone's going to frown upon it. But I mean, how much bigger is it going to be than $50 million a year after they pay $50 million to Dak Prescott and after they pay $50 million maybe to Tua, and then we'll wait and see on Trevor Lawrence. I don't think the risk is that high for how much more you'd have to pay versus making a deal this year, where if you're coming on the heels of Jared Goff getting the money that he got, it's just going to be impossible. So maybe be willing to pay, $5 million more per year, holding off the deal for next year if things go well, and then you have some wiggle room, the franchise tag, some other things you can use if things don't necessarily go so well and you want to figure it out going forward. All right, let's look at the Q&A here in the old chat to see if we have something interesting here. Off-season junk like mock drafts and instant draft grades are frustrating and unhelpful off-season content. What useful content is forgotten about, but still a fun time? What useful content on the off season? That is an interesting one. I mean, I do think there's more availability of people who are part of the NFL to do interviews and things like that. I at least had some where I've interviewed some analytics people in the off season. I'm going to try to do that again. So I think that can be somewhat interesting off-season content that people should think about. Any sort of analytical analysis, and I'll try to do some of this stuff, projecting guys going forward can be interesting. And I do think, at least in the fantasy football space, they're thinking about these things constantly through the off-season in a predictive sort of way. So, the content you're getting there is hopefully, months in advance of the real thinking content that you're going to see in a lot of the football sphere. Next question from Jesse here. Marginal returns on paying wide receivers with Waddle and Nico and Devontae Smith and T contracts being hot topics. I was curious if their place on the depth chart factors into the value of the contract. I think it does somewhat, although I remember Eric Eager, now of the Panthers, now probably as we're speaking, having an expensive five Michelin 5-star dining experience with David Tepper. He wrote a piece about the weak link versus strong link systems. So just to briefly talk about this, The offensive line is a weak link system because only one of the offensive linemen has to be bad for you to get a pressure on the quarterback, whereas the defensive pass rush is a strong link system because even if everyone but one pass rusher is bad, if that one pass rusher gets to the quarterback, you're doing well. So it used to be thought in a similar way, except for reversed offensive defensively when it came to coverage and receivers. So receivers being a strong link system, if you have one good receiver, they can get open, you can throw it to them, even if your other guys are trash and they're just standing out there occupying one defender. And then the coverage was a weak link system because all of them have to be good, or else you're just going to pick on the one guy who's not good. What he found was that wide receivers becoming a little bit more of a weak link system. Still a strong link system, but the third receiver in particular he looked at was a lot more valuable. And I think that's probably true of the second receiver. We just don't see the prototype 150 target a season, Calvin Johnson, Julio Jones type of guy that we had seen in the past. See smaller receivers. We see a lot of them getting open more often, which is a little bit weird because we're also seeing contract values skyrocket up on wide receivers. So that's why I think, and some people are talking about this for Nico Collins, they're like, you're getting out ahead of it now with this contract now because it's going to be so much more expensive in the future. I mean, if we're coming off of rapid inflation in any positional spending, maybe outside of quarterback, my assumption would be that inflation, that if it went out the next 10 years, those would maybe be positions that wouldn't inflate nearly as much. And I think that might be the case for receiver as we start to realize that you just can't fit these guys, especially multiple guys on big contracts on a team with a quarterback spending. So I think there is a positional valuedness. I think positional ranking, I think Waddle maybe could have gotten even more money if he was the wide receiver 1 versus the wide receiver 2, and the Dolphins offense was as successful as it has been the last couple of seasons. But that should be going down. If anything, there should be a flattening between the different receivers and how much they're getting paid, which will be interesting to see now that we have these big guys making big money. I guess the test cases will be the true dominant prototype wide receiver 1s of Jamar Chase and Justin Jefferson. What are those guys going to be making? That's what I really want to see. Is the wide receiver market becoming like the quarterback market, where if you have a Justin Jefferson or a Jamar Chase and they're making marginally more than an Amon-Ra St. Brown, are you getting a lot of relative value there? In the same way, if a Patrick Mahomes is making marginally more money than a quarterback who's the 8th best, 10th best in the NFL, that's a massive value. Or is there going to get somewhat of a phenomenon there? I think we might. I think I would just be more scared to pay the Amon-Ra St. Browns of the world and figure out how you're going to build a core around all of that than the Jamar Chases and the traditional prototype wide receiver 1s. I might have gone in a circle on that answer, but okay, this is from Rad Milk. I don't know what Rad Milk is, but Rad Milk, thanks for the question. I've noticed you gravitate towards EPA per play as a worthwhile metric for QB play. What makes this a preferred metric as opposed to PFF grade, QBR, etc.? I don't necessarily agree, just curious. Okay, so I would say there are two fundamental things when it comes to metrics that we're using. So we're all trying to capture like the truth, the reality. Now, one way to measure the truth, I think a good way to measure the truth, is its predictive nature. So these other things are pretty good predictive nature wise. Grading, CPOE is another one that may or may not help when you add it to the predictive mix with EPA per play. So they have some predictive measures going on there. And the two areas when we're looking at within a metric is, number one, how much does it isolate the player? So PFF grade, at least theoretically, and I think it does, not just theoretically, isolates the quarterback play better than EPA per play because, you throw an interception-worthy play and you get a bad PFF grade where if it's dropped interception, or if it's tipped and then you get a touchdown, you get a good result from EPA per play. Your accuracy, how well you're throwing, and some of those things can be more for PFF grade. So that's one thing. The other thing is, how well does it measure what's actually the value of what's actually happening on the field? And that's where EPA per play is like astronomically better, because it'll show you these sacks are really, really, really negative versus what people think when they're watching it. It'll show you, hey, these scrambles sometimes can be really, really positive. It'll show you that if you throw an interception on 3rd and 10 on your own 5-yard line, but you heave it 60 yards down the field. And we saw this with Josh Allen a lot, right? Is that Allen had a lot of arm punts. So the interceptions look bad. The PFF grade looks bad because it's graded as an interception-worthy play, but the EPA isn't that bad. And that's kind of what we care about. Points are kind of what we care about at the end of the day. So I think that EPA per play, the accuracy of valuing the play types supersedes maybe the ability to isolate the quarterback when it comes to PFF grading for me. And I also think PFF grading might mimic a little bit more of you're just quote unquote watching the game, what you feel or see, because people get way too upset about the interceptions when they shouldn't. And maybe not as upset about sacks when they think it's the offensive line's fault as they should, and things like that. And sometimes just making the right play, you don't get any credit in grading, but you do get credit on EPA. So it's those sorts of things. I think just all in all, let's look at points. Let's look at being able to measure all these different plays against each other and the accuracy of that versus isolating the quarterback. And that's why I think it's better. I also think if you just look at like a rank ordering of EPA per play versus a rank ordering of PFF grading, if you have a large enough of a sample, normally that meshes more with what, I would tell myself about quarterback rankings. Okay. That's it for me. We're a little bit over an hour here. I appreciate everyone for tuning in. I'll do this again next week. Go to the Substack, subscribe, unexpectedpoints.substack.com. Going to do some quarterback projections for some of these young classes. The second-year guys, not much when it comes to third-year guys. And then the fourth-year guys, who they're going to look at going forward. That content will be coming down the pipe pretty soon, but when we got June coming up, which is going to probably one of the slower months, and we'll continue going forward, but I'll continue to talk here, continue to take questions, and we have lots of evergreen sort of topics we can discuss on here, and hopefully we'll continue to do so. Until then, thanks everyone for tuning in, and I'll talk to you next week. Thanks.